it's remarkable. Al Gore, I can't recall, but I don't believe Al Gore is a Catholic. John Kerry could not connect even with that base that he should have been able to speak to so directly. So here's just some of the charts from 2004, percentage of vote won by a Republican presidential candidate. This was Bush's gains from 2000 to 2004, picking up 10 points amongst white evangelicals, 5 points amongst Catholics. 2006, I'll skip over that because I want to kind of leave some time for questions. 2004 versus 2008. This is sort of Obama enters at this point, and obviously a ton of dynamics happening in 2008. The economy was beginning to tank. George Bush, by this point, was quite unpopular. We were in a couple of wars in the Middle East, which were also unpopular. There's many, many, many reasons why Barack Obama is currently president of the United States. But he also, it's notable that he did perform much better amongst white evangelicals, Catholics, and Jewish voters by 5 points better, 7 points, and 4 points respectively in 2008. And this is against a backdrop where he was, on the one hand, being called a Muslim. You know, we all, if you had email at that point, you're probably, my grandmother was sending me these things, every other day about how he was a Muslim. I'm like, please stop sending me these emails. And at the same time, criticism for being part of this, this radical church in Chicago with the Reverend Jeremiah Wright. And it sort of always struck me, I'm like, how can he be both a Muslim and part of this radical denomination in Chicago that's obviously a Christian denomination? But yet he was sort of getting it from both ends. Nonetheless, it didn't matter. He did make gains amongst religious voters in 2008. So I'll also skip over 2010. Let's focus on the presidential stuff for now. So lessons learned during this period of time, and even dating back further, within the Democratic Party, we began to do some soul searching and realizing that outreach to faith voters was less consistent and less institutionalized than it needed to be, at times completely non-existent. Voters view Democrats less favorably than Republicans when it comes to religion. That's kind of like, yeah, we know that. And yet, when Democrats do faith outreach, it has produced concrete results, and Democrats can and have won faith voters when they attempt to do so and when they speak from a genuine place and they articulate it from an authentic place. So, to the focus of this morning, within the millennial generation, pretty much if you've been, if you're born 1980 and on, there is a shift occurring which we think is fairly significant. So religious identity among millennials, religious identity is not a surprise, is slipping within this generation. That's not a surprise. However, still 44% still identify as evangelicals or Catholics, and it's still a pretty significant portion of the population. It's actually 36.4 million people, young people, that identify as evangelicals or Catholic. And if you are in the political field as I am, that's a lot of votes. And so to just sort of ignore people of faith completely would be a mistake. So young values voters, 18 to 35. Some polling, a lot of polling has been done recently, and this is one of the conclusions. Nearly half of young born-again Christians said they perceive the political efforts of conservative Christians to be a problem in America. So there's becoming a backlash against sort of the last 30 years of abortion and gay marriage being the only issues that you're allowed to talk about when it comes to faith and politics and the Christian right, and there's beginning to be a slightly differing view of how you approach your faith in the public arena, and nearly 50% say they have concerns with the way that it's been handled in the past. Top young Catholic issues in 2008 were improving the economy, making healthcare more affordable, protecting U.S. from terrorism, resolving the Iraq War, and improving public education. It's really probably not that different from just the voting populace at large, and you don't see these quote-unquote moral issues coming to the top of the list amongst younger voters. And this is probably the most interesting chart of all. Party ID amongst white evangelicals ages 18 to 29 between the years of 2005 and 2007. In 2005, shortly after Bush's re-election campaign that we just talked about a second ago, Party ID was 55% of young people, white evangelicals perceived themselves to be Republicans, identified with the Republican Party, and 14% identified with the Democratic Party. In just 2 years, and I don't have more recent data than this, but I believe that the trend certainly continued through 2008. That shifted to 40% to 19%, and 32% are considered independent. So that is actually about a 15-point gain between the drop in Republicans and the rise in Democratic identification. It's a 15-point gain in 2 years. It's dramatic. So, there it is, 15 points between 2005 and 2007. And the older millennial Catholics, young Catholics overwhelmingly identify as Democrat, even more than the parents' generation by a sizable margin as well. So, this is also from the Public Religion Research Institute from some polling that they did. It's quite telling, and I think sort of paints a more nuanced and specific picture of why this is happening. Millennial evangelicals are more likely to favor a bigger government, offering more services by a margin of 21 points, 44%, and this is as opposed to our parents' generation, 44% to 23% supporting a more government services. More likely to believe diplomacy rather than military strength is the best way to ensure peace, 56% to 44%. More likely to favor either same-sex marriage or civil unions, 51% to 39%, and 2/3 of evangelicals under 35 are willing to vote for a candidate who disagree with them on abortion. Millennial Catholics more likely to favor bigger government with more services, 66 to 41. More likely to oppose the death penalty. More likely to support legalizing marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Express greater support for allowing children of legal immigrants' parents to attend public schools in the U.S. And are more likely to favor legalization of abortion in all cases. If you look at sort of the party platform of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and their actions in the past couple of years, and pardon the little bit of partisan jabbing going on here, but we tried to lay out, when we started to launch the Faith and Values Initiative, some contrasts, which include the following. Young Christians on poverty, close to half favor bigger government and more services. Democrats fought to prevent cuts to poor in budget negotiations, and that's, of course, continuing in Congress now. And the Paul Ryan plan earlier this year, two-thirds of cuts in the Ryan budget came from basically services for lower-income Americans. Immigration, favor comprehensive bill over enforcement by a 2-to-1 margin. The Democratic Party supports the DREAM Act, which would allow children of illegal aliens to be able to attend universities and to have a path to citizenship, and Republicans largely oppose that. Jobs in the economy was the top issue in 2008. Obama, of course, has the Jobs Act. There's the stimulus, the Recovery Act. The environment, majority consider it an important issue. Majority of young faith voters consider the environment an important issue. The Democratic House passed the energy bill in 2009 and the energy and climate bill and clean energy provisions within the Recovery Act. Republicans opposed the climate bill. And even on gay rights, which of course is a very controversial issue, majority of young faith voters favor civil unions or marriage, and also the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which just went into effect in September, supported by the Democratic Party, largely opposed by the Republican Party. So a bit of a breakdown and why some of this shift we think is occurring within young faith voters. And of course, our very own Tony Campolo has had a quote, just last November, had a column on Huffington Post where he attempted to explain a little bit about why this shift is occurring. He says, young people under the age of 30 are more and more circumventing Christian talk radio and getting their news reports off their computers. Add to that, they are less and less likely to pay much attention to the television pundits on Fox News, which sometimes includes me. The Pew Foundation researchers discovered that those in this age group are far more likely to get their news from Jon Stewart on The Daily Show and from Stephen Colbert on The Colbert Report. I think we all know that to be, at least anecdotally, to be somewhat true. And that's part of the reason why Dr. Campolo believes that some of this shift is occurring. So that brings us to my sort of last area, which is the launch of the YDA Faith and Values Initiative and what it's all about and why we are doing it. So, as I mentioned earlier, my experience with Liberty University just reminded me that the Democratic Party was not doing a good job of messaging around this or of cultivating young faith voters within the Democratic Party. And so last year when I ran for president, this was one of the planks that I ran on, that we actually needed to do more specific and intentional faith voter outreach. So the goals of the Faith and Values Initiative, which we launched last month at the Values Voters Summit in Washington, D.C., which if any of you all know anything about the Values Voters Summit, it is the most conservative, Christian right sort of summit that happens each year. And we went into the Omni Shoreham Hotel in D.C. and rented a little side room and did a press conference right in the middle of their event, which was a lot of fun. So we, the goal of the initiative is to create value-added resources for young people that want to speak to their peers, to other Christians, win new voters and activists to the party, establish a national network of young faith voters, train activists, party leaders, and candidates in faith literacy, and expand YDA's reach to a broader and more diverse constituency. Some key components of the initiative: communications and campaign strategy toolkit to actually be able to share intentionally with many of our local chapters around the country that are working in campaigns. We have a website up and development of an online community. Faith and Values Summit leading into the 2012 cycle. We're going to have a summit in D.C. early next year, which we encourage all of you to attend. Virtual and in-person trainings, emphasis on recruitment and membership building in collaboration with other party institutions and like-minded organizations to maximize our efforts. So this was sort of the goal that we had in mind. Josh Dixon, who is a master's student at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, I asked him to come on and lead this as the director of the initiative, and he is doing an incredible job. It's looking like we're going to be having a press conference with DNC Chairwoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz in 2 weeks in Washington, D.C. to do a larger unveil of the initiative. The party is very excited about our work around this area. And Josh is an interesting story himself. He grew up in a very conservative Republican home, conservative Christian home, and then he went to Chicago and did Teach for America, and was faced with really incredible situations within the public school system in Chicago, and particularly the school where he was teaching, where textbooks were not available. Basically the level of education that these students were receiving because of the resources that were available, it was just heartbreaking to him. And he began to sort of view his own faith experience and his own perception of politics through that lens as a Teach for America employee in Chicago. And he came out of that year and said, I'm not a Republican at all. I actually think that government has a place to actually resource these schools, make sure that there's not greater disparities between schools that are inner city poor schools and suburban wealthier schools, that there's more that we can be doing in the policy arena to address these things. And he said, I see the Democratic Party working on this, not the Republican Party. So his story is very compelling, and when he tells it a lot better than I do. But he's beginning to travel around the country and share his story and begin to work with young people who want to get involved in this. So we're also going to be utilizing religious media, developing tailored campaign literature, listening sessions with key religious leaders, events at faith-based colleges and churches, and service days to sort of highlight the work that we're doing. Some basic principles for effective faith communications: develop language that communicates how candidates' values line up with the key policy positions, expand the debate and focus in on key issues that millennial values voters care about, inoculate candidates against values-based attacks, and effectively employ signaling strategy to demonstrate friendliness towards religion. You're sort of seeing a little bit behind the curtain right now. This is not it's a bit of sort of a strategy in the way that we're approaching it, but I wanted to kind of give you an honest view of what we're doing. And also preparing candidates to tell personal testimony, both personal call to faith and call to public service for candidates who embrace faith personally. And we always say, if you're a young Democrat and you don't claim to be a person of faith, don't fake it. It's the absolute worst situation you could put yourself in, because if people sense that you're not authentic, it's not going to fly. I'm running low on time, so I'm going to just move through this really quickly. What we say not to do is don't change your beliefs or policy positions, radically alter your campaign strategy, disingenuously adopt religion, or waging a war over who is holier. We have absolutely no intention of trying to say that the religious right is any less Christian or more Christian than us. We're simply trying to provide another voice into public discourse. Josh actually used several verses. I'm not sure how often at an official Democratic Party event scripture is quoted, like sort of over and over and over again, but at our press conference last month, we used several verses, including these three here. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of our Lord's favor. And then Josh got into many of the policy areas that we think help to sort of accomplish some of these goals. What was one of the most profound moments so far in the early days of this presidential campaign on the Republican side was a few weeks ago in Florida, when the topic of health insurance came up, and a story was told of a person who died because they did not have health insurance, and the Republican audience that was there that night actually cheered. And it was sort of a chilling moment for those of us who care deeply about these issues and who view them through a faith perspective. And watch what you put on Facebook, because John Huntsman, obviously one of the Republican candidates for president, his scheduler that night after the debate ended posted on Facebook, and it went viral. She said, "For years, I've tried to prove that the GOP isn't the party of elitist, stereotypical people that lack compassion. When did creativity and growth become secondary to hate? Hearing the debate crowds go crazy over things like executions and the uninsured dying makes me sick and sad for my party that I devote my time and efforts." That's from a staffer of one of the Republican candidates running for president right now. That's not from me. That's from her own words, and it was a fairly telling moment, about kind of where we are within the debate within the Republican Party right now. Very quickly, this initiative is not without risks, which I am fully willing to acknowledge, because we could try to emulate the Christian right and make many of the same mistakes by basically using faith as a blunt political object, which is not what we're attempting to do. We're attempting to just provide balance within the public conversation. But Jim Wallis, one of my favorite authors, in his book God's Politics, says, "The media likes to say, 'Oh no, you must be the religious left.' Not at all. And the very question is the problem. Just because a religious right has fashioned itself for political power in one utterly predictable ideological guise does not mean that those who question this political seduction must be their opposite political counterpart. The best public contribution of religion is precisely not to be ideological, predictable, nor a loyal partisan." Well, I am sort of a loyal partisan, so I'm venturing into some very dangerous territory, but I think we're going to try to do it very, very carefully. And another quote from that book, "We are reminded that faith regards matters such as the sacredness of life and family bonds as so important that they should never be used as ideological symbols or mere political pawns in partisan warfare." I think that's so true, and it's a sort of a principle that we're attempting to live by as we navigate into this difficult and somewhat uncharted territories within the Democratic Party. But at the same time, to be silent around these issues is also not an alternative. As a evangelical Christian Democrat, if my voice is not heard, and if the YDA Faith and Values Initiative's voice is not part of this discussion, only one side of the story is being told, and we need to provide a very safe place and a welcoming place for this new millennial generation that's coming up and viewing their faith and their interaction with politics differently than their parents did, and we have to have room for them within the Democratic Party, which is what we're trying to make right now. So with that, I appreciate very much the opportunity to be with you all here this morning, and I'm happy to take any questions. There's got to be like a Republican in the room that does not like anything I just said. Don't be shy. Well, it's a very good question. Within the millennial generation, voters under the age of 30, party identification at all is waning significantly. So less and less young people, fewer and fewer young people perceive themselves to be either Republicans or Democrats. Most are now finding themselves to be unaffiliated or independents. So if we ignore that block of voters, we're actually losing a huge, significant, not just within the larger population, but especially amongst young people who are kind of fed up with labels. And I get that with what's happening. I mean, I'm in DC every single day, and I'm a political junkie, and I'm just about sick of it. Like, I can't deal with the gridlock that's happening right now and the blaming and all of this. It's very unfortunate. So that group of voters have to be reached in a very different manner. When it comes to faith in politics, though, I think that group of voters can respond to messages like this just the same as sort of people on the left or the right. If you're a person of faith and you are an independent, I want to be hearing people on the left or within the Democratic Party being comfortable talking about their religion and talking about their faith background, because if it's only the Republicans saying these things, you think that, as was assumed for 30 years, the Democrats are all secularists. So I think independents need to hear this message as well, which is partly why we're doing it, especially amongst younger people, if that makes sense. And I know I'm speaking specifically to this topic area, but
I am a progressive Christian who has finally decided over the past many years to disalign myself with either party, because one of my difficulties that I see continuing and the divide even getting greater is when we develop partisan stands, Democrat as opposed to Republican, we widen the gulf and we reduce the dialogue between people.
mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about trying to departisanize politics. Sorry, that's not a real word, but what comes to mind?
Well, Obama, I think in 2008, partially ran as a post-partisan figure a little bit. I think his experience in Washington, D.C. has taught him that, practically speaking, it's not working, because you can try to approach these things as a post-partisan or as a non-partisan, and the knives are out. So I think he's had to respond in kind. I mean, I'm a partisan leader, but I actually would think that's unfortunate. I agree with you. My part in this, my own little tiny little personal piece of this, is that I will not escalate the sort of venomous dialogue around these issues. I will not go onto cable news and throw hateful things. I will present arguments based on the facts, talk about the issues, talk about my personal experience. But the rhetoric has just become so out of control, and so much of our news cycle and so much of our sort of political discourse is now limited to 2 or 3 minute sound bites on cable news that is so unhelpful. And so I actually resisted at first even kind of getting into that arena, but you can't avoid it. My goal is to soften this language a little bit and to not just play blame games constantly, but actually talk about productive things. And I think there's a ton of things that, as a Democrat, I can point to that my party has done even in the last few years without villainizing the other side. So, I mean, that's all from one person. That's what I'm attempting to do. Maybe one more question.
You were talking about in '94 how the Republicans really got involved with churches and sending them voter registration. Do you see what you're doing now as something to really save what might happen next year because of the president's negatives being so high right now, in addition to so many voters that voted for him in '08 may not come out in 2012? Do you see this as a way to mobilize the base as well again and get them out in 2012?
Well, we see it as an ability to, as I said, to broaden the discussion in a way that that young voters young faith voters, young Christians, and by the way, this actually the project encompasses. We actually are going to eventually have people working on young Jewish voters, young Muslim voters, etc. But I mean, because I'm an evangelical Christian, I'm speaking at Eastern University, I've limited this conversation this morning, but the goal is to make sure that those voters feel like they have a place in the Democratic Party, and that Barack Obama or whoever the Democratic candidate is for Congress or whatever, that if they actually have a message that syncs up with this person's faith, that it's told in that context. So I think that's the main part of it, is to be able to have a conversation in language that people understand and can relate to their faith. I think that does have an electoral impact, for sure. And I think it could, and hopefully will have an impact on the outcome of the election. But there's still also a lot of really hard work around turnout and making sure that young people are registered to vote and all the other traditional things that we always do. That's going to really be the foundation for making sure the president's reelected next year. This supplements that, and I think helps add to sort of the dialogue around faith and politics. So with that, I think we're out of time, but thank you.
Please join me again. Thank you. Rod will be here for a few minutes if you'd like to come down and speak with him more personally. And again, join us if you can for lunch between 11:30 and close to 1. Thank you very much.